On today's field trip, we'll be visiting a salt marsh community. The best place in the Pensacola area to find a pristine salt marsh is Big Lagoon State Park at Innerarity Point. This park is named after a bar-built estuary called Big Lagoon. It's just to the south of western Pensacola and is separated from the Gulf of Mexico by a barrier island called Perdido Key. Big Lagoon is so pristine because a lot of the shoreline surrounding it is protected by the State Park, Naval Air Station Pensacola, and the Gulf Islands National Seashore. All right, we're coming into Big Lagoon State Park. Usually you have to pay an entrance fee at the ranger station, but we're going to get in for free today because we're with the college on a field trip. Hi, we're with PSC. So the area we're traveling through right now is called Transitional Zone. As we come up along on the right, you should be able to see Big Lagoon. We're headed to East Beach, which is at the very end of the trail. And it has a tower and a boardwalk, and that's the area where we're going to be spending our time this afternoon. And here we are. Grab your gear and let's go. All right, we're going to head up the boardwalk here and to the bridge. Oh, do you hear that? Awesome. It's a red-winged blackbird. Absolutely beautiful. All right, there's a little picnic table area here. There's also an area where you can put kayaks in the water. I would not worry about the sign that warns about alligators. I've never seen one out here before. Been coming here for 20 years. Notice the color of the water. It looks like tea. That's a natural phenomenon, not pollution. It's due to tannins from decomposition of leaves. Out that direction is Big Lagoon, and beyond it, Perdido Key and the Gulf of Mexico. This area is called a tidal creek. It's where fresh water from the lake drains down and mixes with salt water from the Big Lagoon. There's some picnic areas down there. We're going to be walking down that way to do some of our biological sampling in a little bit. You can see the bottom, it's pretty shallow here, which is a great place to do our water quality sampling. So you guys learned how to do this on our last field trip, so I'm going to let you guys divide it up and do the water quality testing. All right, great. Looks like everybody's done with the data collection. So let me go over this with you just a moment before we do anything else. The site location is Big Lagoon State Park, of course. Longitude and latitude, I worked on that while you guys were in the process of recording your information on your data sheet and doing your data collection. I got the handheld GPS out, and so the longitude is 87.40284 degrees, and the latitude is 30.30970 degrees. Once again, that's the longitude 87.40284 degrees, and latitude 30.30970 sorry, 30.30970 degrees. All right. Date and time, hopefully you got that figured out. Estimated percent cloud cover. I saw you guys working on that one. Tidal stage, the tide is coming in right now. So if you want to just record that, you can actually see the water kind of coming in under the bridge. You guys were working on visibility with the SecuDis, dissolved oxygen with the dissolved oxygen meter, as well as temperature, pH with the pH meter, salinity with the refractometer, dissolved carbon dioxide with the dissolved carbon dioxide test kit, the blue kit, and the most difficult one, Farrell-Ewell Collard scale. I saw you guys working on that one. The remaining ones, depth of the reducing layer, sediment composition, and fecal coliform. Those are actually ones which will have to wait until we get down in the water and read the rest of those. So for now, we're just going to pause on the data sheet. And I would like for you guys to come over here this side of the bridge and look over the railing with me. I want to point out a few things to you. And then we are going to walk down to the tower and climb up the stairs and get the bird's eye view of the park. And I'll tell you a few more things once we get up there. Okay, so come on over here and let's take a look. You can see quite a few small fish in the tidal creek below. And if you look out in the center, you can see a great blue heron. I also want to point out two of the most important plant species in the marsh. The light green sprouts are Spartina alterniflora, or smooth cordgrass. And the taller brownish green stems are Juncus romerianus, the black needle rush. Okay, folks, if you'll just grab the gear and bring it along, we're going to go down here to the tower. Afternoon. You guys can leave the gear down here somewhere at the edge of the stairs. Watch your step. Wow, it's beautiful, don't you think?
Oh, yes, it is. And it's quite windy also.
Oh, check it out, laughing gulls.
Yeah, it's really pretty out here today.
You can see the entire marsh from up here, including the area where the tidal creek connects to Big Lagoon. That's Perdido Key out there, and beyond it you can see a glimpse of the Gulf of Mexico. Do you see these lighter areas in the lagoon? Those are sand flats, and the darker areas, those are seagrass beds. If you look to your right a little bit, you can see a post sticking up in the water. It's one of several navigational markers that are along here. They mark the shipping channel for boats. Big Lagoon is actually part of a series of interconnected bodies of water called the Intracoastal Waterway System, and ship traffic runs back and forth along here, especially a lot of barges. Look down there and you can see the tip of Perdido Key, also Pensacola Pass. So just beyond Pensacola Pass down there is Santa Rosa Island, where Fort Pickens is. And across the bay from it, that's Naval Air Station Pensacola, with the historic Pensacola Lighthouse sticking up. Can you see it? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the marsh, and let me come over here and point out some things. So the marsh is divided into 4 zones: the low marsh, the high marsh, the salt barren, and the transitional zone. Along the edges of the tidal creek is where we find smooth cordgrass, Spartina alterniflora. This is an area that's called low marsh, and it gets flooded every day at high tide. A little further back from the tidal creek is the high marsh. This is the area where black needle rush, Juncus romerianus, grows. You can recognize it by the brownish green plant coverage. Now let's look at the areas that are near the boardwalk and the pavilions. Over to your right. These are a little higher above the water level. The areas with bare exposed soil, those are salt barrens. These areas rarely get flooded, but when they do, the salt water quickly evaporates, leaving behind very salty soil. It's not really good for plant growth. That's why we call it a salt barren. The transitional zone is a little higher altitude. It's right next door, and it supports more trees and terrestrial plant growth. All right, now that we've had an overview of the park and the marsh, let's go down to the boardwalk and head over to the area where we're going to be collecting today. Right out there. Don't forget to pick up the gear on the right there. Bring that with us. I'm going to point out some plants as we walk along here. Here's one right here. This is Ilex vomitoria, called Yopon holly. Very common out here. It gets these red berries at some times of the year. If you eat them, it will make you vomit. That's why it's called Ilex vomitoria. We're going to take a right on the boardwalk here. Oh, look, a little lizard. I want to point out some plants here to your right. So these are saw palmettos, Serenoa rapens. Oh, check it out. That's a little green anole, Anole carolinensis. It's called Serenoa rapens, is the saw palmetto. Very common in transitional zone and also in pine flatwoods forests. Let's see, there's a couple more things up ahead I want to point out. On your left here. So that is a plant that's called southern wax myrtle. It's a very common, large shrub that grows out here. And right next to it, believe it or not, this is a live oak tree. It's called sand live oak. It's really the same species we have on the mainland, but it just grows more stunted out here because of the lack of water and dry conditions and some of the salt in the air. And you can see there's some marsh area, low marsh there and high marsh. And we're, of course, walking through a mixture of salt barren and transitional zone. The bare soil there is salt barren, and where you see the trees and bushes, that's transitional zone. You can see just a couple centimeters, really, in altitude can make a difference. We're going to take a right and go down these stairs around the edge of the pavilion and down to the bank of the tidal creek. So when we get down there, we need to finish our water quality sampling. We still need to do fecal coliform, percent composition of the sediment, and also the depth of the reducing layer. Take the trail to the left up here, around the corner, and we'll go down to the bank. Okay, you can put the buckets and gear down here, anywhere in the grass. All right, well, here we are. We've got to finish a couple of our water quality tests. Really need somebody to take a graduated cylinder and take it down into the water and scoop up some sediment. And we're going to do a sediment analysis. It's a very simple, quick and dirty method, but it gives us an estimation of the kind of sediments that are present and the percentages. that are present here. All right, so next we need somebody to do a test called depth of the reducing layer. You need somebody to walk out with a clear plastic tube, kind of jam that into the sediment and stick their thumb in the top and then pull out a plug of sediment from the bottom. Okay?
I'll do it.
Great. All right, it looks like he's got a sediment core for us. So you can see that lighter colored sand at the top of the tube. That is oxidized sand, or sand that has oxygen present in it. Then there's a darker colored sand below that. That's a sand that's very low in oxygen, what we call a reducing environment. So the transition between the light and the dark is at 1 centimeter of depth. So we would say the depth of the reducing layer is 1 centimeter. So that reducing layer there is very high in a chemical called hydrogen sulfide. If you stir that sediment up, it smells like rotten eggs. Hydrogen sulfide is a byproduct of bacterial decomposition without oxygen being present. All right, great. Thank you for getting that core for us. And the last test that we need to do is the fecal coliform test. So we're going to just actually collect the water sample right now, and then it takes 24 hours for the test results to come in. So if I could get somebody to take a sterile water bottle and go down in the water and collect a water sample, please.
Oh, I'll do it.
That's all the water quality data that we need to collect. So we're going to get in the water now. So grab a bucket and a dip net and let's go. As we're waiting, please remember to shuffle your feet. Ooh, check it out. It's a snowy egret.
Oh, that's a big one. Oh, what is that? Oh, I think that's a blue crab.
Wow, these are little. They're everywhere. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. This is getting away. Oh, see if you can get
Somebody
it.
should catch it.
Wow, these things are fast. Oh, these are so tiny. Look at this one. It's actually really cute.
All right, you're doing good. Keep curving over towards the shoreline. Bring it up over here. All right, you almost got it. Come back. All right, everybody, gather around. It's time for us to go over our species checklist and check off all the organisms that we've seen today or collected. You guys have brought your buckets here, so we're going to go through those and We'll refresh our memories about some things that we saw as we were walking through the park and get those all checked off as well. So does everybody have their species checklist ready? Something to write with? All right, good. All right, so let's first start with plants. In terms of plants that we've seen while we've been in the park, obviously one of the most abundant plants we've seen are smooth cord grass, Spartina alterniflora, and the black needle rush, Juncus romerianus. So the smooth cord grass was the sort of lighter green grass that was growing mostly submerged in the water, in the marsh, and the taller, darker colored grass with pointy tips on the stems, that's the black needle rush. Next, let's talk about the sand live oak. We saw those along the boardwalk. They're in the transitional zone. So that's another one we can check off. Also, Yopon holly was also in the transitional zone. It's Ilex vomitoria. And the sand live oak was Quercus virginiana. Also in that same area, we saw saw palmettos. So you can check that one off, Serenoa repens. Also in the transition zone, we saw southern wax myrtle. That's America cerifera. Was there anything else? Oh, we saw a couple of random seals. They're a little confused. They're supposed to be out at the beach, but there are a few seals around here. Probably see a couple more on our way out of the park. So go ahead and check that one off. All right, let's move on then and talk about arthropods or shellfish. I'm going to try to do a better job than I did last time. I was kind of going through things randomly in the bucket, so I'm going to try to select things out of the bucket that are all part of one category and then move on to the next category of organisms. The first one, I've got to put on a glove here so that I can pick it up. All right, so let me go ahead and put that on. All right, and okay, so this is the blue crab, Calanectes sapidus. Put this glove on because these things can definitely pinch you and draw blood. So anyway, we don't usually collect these, but somebody went up and put it in a bucket. So I told them not to put anything in the bucket with it. So we'll take a look at it. But if you look at the underside of the blue crab, you can tell whether they're male or female. I always tell everybody, if the tail of the blue crab looks like the top of the Capitol dome, it's a girl. And if the tail looks like the top of the Washington Monument, then it's a boy. All right, so look at this. You can see that it's more like the Washington Monument. So this is a male blue crab. So that's the blue crab. Normally, I don't like people to collect these things and put them in the buckets because they do get in the way and they eat a lot of the other organisms and people can get injured. So that's why this one's not bucket all by itself. So I'll put it back in the water by itself. All right, let me take this glove off and use this more. Okay, let's talk about some other arthropods or shellfish. Next one is the brown shrimp, as Peneus aztecus. All right, Peneus aztecus, the brown shrimp. We saw these on our previous field trip. Peneus aztecus, the brown shrimp, is one of the commercially viable species of shrimp that's harvested for the enormous Gulf of Mexico shrimp fishery. And just like in the seagrass meadows, these guys are over here in the salt marsh because the salt marsh is acting as a nursery area. All right, so just like seagrass meadows, salt marshes are nursery areas, and that's why the brown shrimp is here. There's another type of shrimp in here. Let this one go. So this is a grass shrimp, just like the ones we saw at the seagrass meadow. Grass shrimp, these guys don't get much bigger than this, and people don't generally eat them. We talked about them a little bit last time, but just the same reason that the brown shrimp are here. They're here because there's lots of hiding places, but they don't grow up and go somewhere else. These guys spend their whole lives here and amongst the grasses. And, we've got another little guy here, and these are different containers here. All right, so this is the genus Yucca minax, I think. But Yucca is the genus name. Yucca are the marsh fiddler crabs. And if you walked around in sort of the intertidal area, as I think most of you did, you undoubtedly saw these things scurrying around on the mud along the banks and in areas around the edges of the grasses. I saw hundreds of these things just today. So they're out here. These guys, you can tell the difference between the males and the females. The males have one big claw and one small claw. The females have two small claws. And that one big claw they use, actually it's a sexual selection. The female tends to choose the male to mate with that has the biggest claw. It's called sexual selection. And I'm not sure why that makes them attractive to the opposite sex, but it does. All right, so and when it comes to crabs, the biggest crab is the most attractive to the ladies. So. All right, so let's also talk about a couple other arthropods that we have here in the bucket. All right, so this is a hermit crab. We've got a couple of different kinds in here and several duplicates, but the hermit crabs, the one that we're looking at here, this one is called the flat-clawed hermit crab. The flat-clawed hermit crab is in a shell from a snail, so you may have to go over to the snails and clams section there to check this one off. But the shell that it's in is a crown conch shell. That's Melangina corona. All right, and the animal that's inside the shell is the flat-clawed hermit crab, Pegurus polycarpus. Polycharis, sorry. So, as is the case always with these hermit crabs, they're mostly scavengers, and they retreat inside their shell when they need protection against predators, and every so often they have to swap out the shell as they grow. There's one other species of hermit crab down here. All right, this guy. This is the striped hermit crab. I don't know if we saw these at the seagrass meadow or not, but striped hermit crabs are Clibanarius vittatus, and this one happens to be in a shell from a moon snail, or they're sometimes called shark's eye snails. The genus name is Polynices, and the species Duplicatus. Polynices duplicatus is the shark's eye or moon snail, and that's the shell that this little guy is living in. All right. I'm going to look and see what other mollusks and what other clams and snails we have in here. So, all right, this beautiful shell is called a crown conch, Melangina corona. So the crown conchs, I believe we saw one also at the seagrass meadow. These are snails that are scavengers. They eat dead stuff, mostly dead fish, but they'll eat a variety of different food sources. But they're a carnivorous snail, basically. And if you turn it over and look at the foot of the snail, you can usually tell what sex it is. The female has a little gland on the base of her foot, on the underside of her foot, that she uses for laying eggs. And the male does not have that, so that's one way you can tell the difference. A couple other, I think, closest thing here. Yeah. All right, so this guy is a Atlantic ribbed mussel. They are found attached to the roots of some of the vegetation, especially the black needle rush. You'll find it attached to the base of the black needle rush and the high marsh. And they use little strands called byssal threads to attach themselves to the base of the roots, to kind of hold them in place there. And they're filter feeders. They filter plankton out of the marsh water. So when the water goes out at low tide and they're stranded there, they close up, they climb up. All right, and then when the water comes back and they get flooded at high tide, then they will open their shell up and start filter feeding again. So a couple other, well, I guess there's one other I can get in here. Yeah. All right, so these little guys, a bunch of these, this is called the marsh periwinkle, Littorina irarita. And these are found mostly on the black needle rush also, but they're not down at the base of the roots so much as they are sort of crawling up and down on the grasses. So they actually follow the tidal cycle. When the tide's coming in, as it is right now, they're crawling up the stems. When the tide starts to go out, then they will start going down the other direction. They actually mimic that movement every day. Every time the tidal cycle is changing, they're following the tidal cycle by moving up or down on the stems. If you remove them, from their environment, take them into the lab, they'll still keep following that tidal cycle for weeks. All right, they have it programmed into their brain, the little clock there that tells them when the tide is, and they go up and down, track that. So what are they eating? These guys are not carnivores, they're not predators, they're actually fungus eaters. Yeah, I don't know what the official word for that is, but they're basically herbivores. They scrape, they have a specialized tongue that's got kind of a rough surface on it. They scrape the surface of the black needle rush and scratch open wounds basically on it. And then fungus colonizes that wound, and then they come back and eat the fungus. All right, so that's really what they're eating. Kind of an interesting way of going about getting your food. All right, so here we have a clump of oysters. That's the eastern oyster, Crassostrea virginica. Oysters are somewhat common in salt marshes and definitely in estuaries. Oysters prefer water that's not full-strength seawater, but not fresh water, so that brackish condition is really what they prefer. And so near the mouth of a river in an estuary is a great place to find oysters. Obviously, the predominant area here is salt marsh, but there are some little patch reefs of oysters that are scattered around here in Big Lagoon. So this is obviously somebody, I'm not sure which of you got this, but this actually came from one of those little patch reefs. So oysters are really important. They do several ecological services. One of the things they do is they help remove suspended sediments from the water and sort of bring those down and get those out of circulation so they're added to the bottom of the estuary instead of being suspended. They also, of course, remove phytoplankton. They're filter feeders. So they remove some phytoplankton, and those two activities actually result in making the water clearer. So they increase visibility in the marsh. There's some indication they may also increase productivity in the marsh as well, fertilizing the growth of the salt marsh grasses, the salt meadow cordgrass, the smooth cordgrass, and the black needle rush. So anyway, that's a little bit about eastern oysters. You need to be very careful if you pick up oysters because the edges on these are very sharp. You can get cut and you can get infections from that. So definitely best to handle those with gloves if you need to handle them. If not, it's best to kind of not be too close to them and definitely not try to step on them. You can definitely get injured seriously. All right. All right, well, I guess that's all of the clams and snails. And I don't think we have any other invertebrates that we need to include. We didn't see any jellyfish or starfish or anything like that. So that brings us to the fish. All right, so this little guy, he's not looking too good. His name is the mosquito fish. Gambusia is the genus name. I think this is Gambusia affinis, but they're all really similar. Mosquito fish, they live up to their name. They eat mosquitoes. In a marsh like this, there's actually lots and lots of salt marsh mosquitoes. They come out at dusk, and you don't see a lot right now, but they come out at dusk and they're here all night long and into the early morning hours. And that's what these guys eat. You may not be familiar with it, but mosquito larvae actually live underwater. They're aquatic, and they live in kind of stagnant areas of water. So this is the perfect habitat for mosquito fish to find plenty of food. This is a species of fish that's actually been utilized by humans to kind of keep mosquitoes down. None of us like to get bitten by mosquitoes. They also carry a lot of diseases. And so in some places around the country and around the world, people use mosquito fish in bodies of water to actually eat some of the mosquitoes and keep them from breeding. So that's kind of a nice feature of it. I've heard that Disney uses this at Disney World, but I don't know if that is accurate or not. But it would make sense for them to take advantage of that if they are indeed utilizing it. All right, so there's lots and lots of these mosquito fish here, and let's move on to the next thing. Let this little guy go. All right, so this little fish here is called a sailfin molly. Sailfin mollies are really beautiful fish. They're very characteristic of salt marshes. They don't live a lot of other places. Sailfin mollies Poecilia latipina, and there's a real distinct difference between the male and the female. If we look carefully at this one, you can see that the dorsal fin is very elongated and very beautiful on these. And that indicates to me that this is a male. All right, the male sailfin molly has this beautiful dorsal fin. The female is a little more bland in her coloration and does not have that elaborate dorsal fin. This is yet another example of sexual selection, as we talked about with the crabs, where in Yucca, the fiddler crab, where the female chooses the male with the biggest claw. In this case, the female fish chooses the male with the most beautiful dorsal fin. So another example of sexual selection. Sailfin mollies eat a lot of small organisms. They'll eat the grass shrimp, they'll eat small zooplankton, they'll eat worms and whatever else they can get a hold of. They don't get real big, so they stay along with the mosquito fish in shallow waters at the margin of the marsh, where the grasses give them plenty of hiding places and keep them away from wading birds that might try to eat them. All right. So this is a silver-side minnow. Silver-side minnows, we saw them at the seagrass meadow. Silver-side minnows are common in a lot of estuary environments. This is a small schooling fish. They eat mostly plankton. They've got this long stripe that goes down the side of their bodies. Silver-side minnow belongs to the species named Manidia berylina, and silver-side minnows are very common in salt marshes as well as seagrass meadows. They tend to be found in schools, and they're food for a lot of other larger organisms, including wading birds. All right, so let's let this guy go. All right, so this is the long-nosed killifish. It is an interesting species. It's a Fungulus similis is the name of it. The long-nosed killifish has an elongated body, a long snout, vertical dark lines that run along the length of the body, and the very last line right before the tail fin actually has in the nails a little polka dot, a little black dot at the belly side of that last stripe. If it doesn't have that dot, then that means it's a female. And this one, if you notice, does not have the dot, so that makes this a female long-nosed killifish. These are very characteristic of salt marshes and occasionally in seagrass meadows as well. So these long-nosed killifish are also extraordinarily tolerant of different salinity changes. The whole genus Fungulus, all the different species of Fungulus, can handle salt concentrations from almost fresh water all the way up to about 40 parts per thousand salt. This is a characteristic that we call euryhaline. And like the other species of smaller fish, the mosquito fish, the sailfin molly, the silverside minnow, all of these are small enough that they serve as great food for some of the wading seabirds that live out here in the marsh. All right, let's look at a little bigger fish. Oh, I got you. Calm down. Calm down, it's okay. All right, so this fish is called the white mullet, Mugilcarima. Mullets are very common in estuaries. They get much bigger. There's a fish that is caught as a food fish, both recreationally and commercially. Mullet, this particular species, Mugilcarima, has a kind of a silvery side to the body, and it has a little golden fleck in the eye, the iris of the eye, and that distinguishes it from some of the other species of mullet that are found here locally. One of the interesting features of mullet is that these are basically plankton feeders. They feed in schools, and they have a unique feature in that they like to jump out of the water. You'll periodically see these things sort of throwing themselves out of the water and then splashing back down into the water. People have speculated for years as to the function and the meaning of why mullet jump. Sometimes people say it's to get away from predators. Sometimes they say it's to knock off parasites. Sometimes they say it's to get more oxygen. Some people say they just do it for fun, right? I don't know why they do it. Chances are it's probably some combination of those features. But nevertheless, if you see a fish jumping up out of the water around here, it tends to be mullet, possibly the white mullet, Mugilcarima. Let's let this guy do it. All right, so this next one is a smaller fish again. This is a sheep's head minnow, Cyprinodon variegatus. The Cyprinodon genus includes lots of different types of minnows. This one being called the sheep's head minnow might make you think it's somehow related to a larger species that we have here in the Florida Gulf Coast called the sheep's head, which gets quite big, and people like to fish for these things. So sheep's head actually has no relationship whatsoever to the sheep's head minnow, completely different organisms. So this is not like a smaller member of a sheep's head. It's a different organism entirely. Sheep's head minnows are real common in the shallow waters of salt marshes, and so it's not surprising that we found one here today. And these are food, once again, for a lot of the wading birds. All right, so this is the pinfish. Should look familiar too, Lagodon rhamboides. Lagodon rhamboides is the pinfish. We saw this at the seagrass meadow. This is a very common fish in estuaries, and one of the few fish that will eat seagrasses. Now, there's not too many seagrasses on this side of the tidal creek, but if you go on the other side into Big Lagoon, we did see there was patches of seagrass over there. So they'll eat seagrass, but they're not that particular. They'll also eat some of the grass shrimp that live here in the marsh and lots of other organisms. You can say pinfish are omnivores, eat a variety of different food species. I think there might be one more fish in here. All right, so this one is the spotfin mohara. Spotfin mohara, Eusinostomus argenteus. I think that's a cool name, Eusinostomus argenteus. The spotfin mohara is a small plankton-feeding fish. They have, if you look at their lips, let's take a close-up look there. Their lips are just amazing. They've got these big, giant lips, which is kind of unusual for a fish. The fish itself is typically not very large, although they're not as small as some of the other fish that we've seen today. Spotfin moharas are pretty common in estuaries, and they're found in this area throughout the panhandle. And they get their name because they do have that spot that's on the fin, so the dorsal fin area. That's all the different species of fish that we have in our bucket. That's going to bring us then to amphibians and reptiles. So we didn't see any amphibians today. We did see one species of reptile. We saw the Carolina anole carolinensis. That's the little green lizard that we saw on the boardwalk and also on the saw palmettos. So that's a species of lizard that's pretty common through the panhandle here and found in a variety of environments, but most likely you're to find those in the transition zone here in the Saltmarsh. They're also found in pine flatwoods forests, and they actually like developed areas too. So you'll find them on the sides of buildings and bushes on campus frequently. We have not seen any other reptiles today that I'm aware of. There are some other lizards and snakes and turtles and things that live out here. We did see the sign there about alligators. We didn't see any alligators today. But there's also a species of diamondback terrapin, which is a type of tortoise that lives out here, but they tend to be nocturnal. So chances of seeing those is kind of small during the day. All right, I think that's it for amphibians and reptiles, which brings us then to the birds. So when it comes to birds, we've seen several different species. When we first came into the park there from the parking lot, we saw the red-winged blackbird. All right, so that's Agelans phoenicians, the red-winged blackbird. And they have that raucous call, and I think even though we haven't seen any more of them, we've been hearing them throughout the afternoon here in the marsh. So there's lots of them out here. They like to live in the transition zone, and they eat mostly insects. Then there was the great blue heron. We saw a couple of those today, wading in the salt marsh and the deeper areas of the water of the tidal creeks. These guys we saw also at the, I think, did we see them at the seagrass meadow? I think we did. But this is the largest of all the wading seabirds that's found here in North America. And the great blue heron, Ardea herodias, all right, is up to 5 feet tall, and they like to wade in the low marsh areas and deeper water, looking for some of these different types of fish. So pretty much any of the fish we've seen today would be potential food for them. They're going to eat them when they're a little bit smaller rather than when they're bigger. But nevertheless, that's pretty common to see those here in the salt marsh. When we were going up the tower, I think we did see some laughing gulls. So those are actually throughout the Gulf Coast here. Laughing gulls is Larus atricilla, right, and known as laughing gulls because of their call. It sounds like they're laughing at you. And in the adult stage, they have that black head. That black head is only present in the adults. It's not found in the juveniles. It takes a while for that adult plumage feathers to come in. So you won't see the black head on the juveniles, just on the adults. And of course, laughing gulls are pirates mostly. They steal food from others, but they'll also go after eggs of other birds, and they'll eat anything that people leave behind. They're scavengers to a great degree as well. And I think that last bird that we saw was the snowy egret, Egretta tula. That's the white-colored wading bird. These also wade in the low marsh and not quite as deep a water as the great blue herons, but they're a wading bird that goes after a lot of these smaller minnows and small fish that we've seen today. Let's see. Mammals. Did anybody see any, I don't suppose we saw any raccoons today? No. Okay. They do live out here, but once again, mostly a nocturnal species. And anybody see any bottlenose dolphins? No? Okay. Well, once in a while, we do see them over in Big Lagoon. I think that's it as far as species that we've seen today then. What we're going to do is dump this bucket and get rid of all of these organisms, let them back into their natural environment. And then we're going to gather up our gear and we're going to hike on out of here. We're going to take a different route. We're going to end up going over the bridge that you see behind me and then back to the visitors center there where the bathhouse is. There's showers there if anybody wants to shower off before we get back in the van and head back to the college. And as we're walking along there, I'm going to point out a few things to you along the way, including some more of those sea oats. They're not supposed to be. We'll show you where those are at on the way out as well. Okay, I think we've done a good job here today. So let's back up everything, make sure we don't leave anything behind, and we'll head on out. Okay. All right, up here on the left, you're going to see a few of those random sea oats that I was telling you about. Like any organism, sea oats don't know where they're supposed to be. They just know what they can tolerate. So the books say they live out at the beach in the dunes. But wherever they can tolerate the conditions, that's where they live. So you can see there is a pair of sea oats. So there's several of them right along here. And it's kind of interesting. You don't expect to see them in a salt marsh. Looks like it's really clouding up to the northeast. Looks like Pensacola may get some rain later this afternoon. As we cross this bridge up ahead, we're going to take a look on either side of the bridge very carefully, look in the mud, and see if you see any evidence of raccoons. We're looking for footprints in the mud. We're also looking for any empty mollusk shells like ribbed mussels. A lot of times they'll come here and feed at nighttime. So look carefully, let me know if you see anything. In the center of the tidal creek, you can see is low marsh and then high marsh on each bank. You can see the tide is continuing to come in. Got transition zone right against high marsh over here. Off in the distance, you can see the observation tower where we were. Beyond the visitor center is transitional zone giving rise to another type of environment called scrub pine community. All right. And then beyond that, it transitions into pine flatwoods. That's Grand Lagoon over there on the right. It's a freshwater lake that drains down into the tidal creek, mixing with the saltier water from Big Lagoon to create the brackish water here. Directly up ahead, those trees you see, those are pine scrub trees, also called sand pines. They belong to the species Pinus clausa. We're going to take a left up here, head on towards the visitor center. There are outdoor showers there where you can shower off. There's also restrooms if you need it. So you can sit the gear down and rinse off, get all the muck off you. Then we're going to carry the gear back to the van and load up and head on back to the college. Don't forget to turn in your water quality data sheets to me before you leave today. It's been a great field trip, everybody. Good job.